Houston's Garage. In this video, I'll be working on the Serpent SRX8 GTe long wheelbase, bag 5. So let's get started. Bag 5 is a continuation of the front assembly. Careful, there's one bag with a clear or whitish O-ring. Make sure you don't lose that. Also, you're going to have two bags with hardware, so be careful not to lose any of the hardware, because one of them does have some small set screws. So what we're going to need first, the parts in this bag that came out. So your pinion, your 5x13x4 sealed bearing, your 8x16x5 sealed bearing, your 8x11x0.2 shim, your outdrive, your M5x4 set screw, along with the O-ring. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and install our bearings. So on the larger side, install the 8x16x5 bearing. And on the smaller side, go ahead and install the 5x13x4 bearing. So next we can do is install the 8x11x0.2 shim onto the pinion. Make sure it sits nice and flush. And then we insert the pinion from the large bearing side. And make sure the bearing doesn't pop out on the other side. So next what we want to do is we want to line up the hole with the flat on the pinion, just like so. We're going to go ahead and install the 5x4 set screw with some blue Loctite so it doesn't back out. I'll make sure that flat is facing the hole, and then we can install our set screw. Everything moves nice and smooth. And lastly, what we can do is we can install the O-ring into the drive cup. And it's a little oversized, so it's going to be hard to get it to sit exactly the way we want. So just keep an eye on it until we actually install our drive shafts in there. But it's in there, shouldn't fall out. So now this is ready to install onto the chassis. So what we're going to need are two M3x10 box head screws, like these. So I need two of those. And we're going to need two M3x20 box head screws. So I'm going to put some Loctite on those screws, and the position, the way this is going to install is the pinion on the high side. So it's going to install just like this. This is going to be facing the bottom, this side's going to be facing the top. Just like so. So the two M3x10 screws go in from the top. Make sure everything's lined up. And then you can flip the chassis over, and the two M3x20 screws are going to install in these two holes here. I'm not going to tighten anything down just yet. Just kind of get it close to where it needs to be. So I want to make sure I can install my differential first. Make sure I have enough play in the transmission before I tighten everything down. Alright, so with the pinion gear installed onto the transmission, we can move on to installing the differential and sway bar mounts onto the car. So we're going to need the differential itself. We need 2 of the diff height inserts. We're going to need the HL insert, and then trim this if necessary. So let's go ahead and just prep this. We have the HL insert. And just slide it onto the bearings. And the kit setup is the high setup, so you want the orientation to look like this. So the diff gear is going to be on the left hand side of the car, and make sure you're installing both the inserts in the correct orientation, and you should be able to just slide it in and rotate. It's going to be kind of like the rear of the car. I think it's just going to be kind of a pain to install. There you go. It's nicely installed the way it's supposed to. All I did was pull back on the out drives and it seemed to pop into place. So now we can get the sway bar mount. We need 2 of these. We're going to need 2 flanged bearings. We're going to need 2 of these collars. We're going to need the sway bar itself. And we're going to need 4 of these set screws. So first thing what we're going to do is we're going to install the set screws so we don't lose them, and it'll be easier to install or tighten down when they're actually on the car itself. Okay, so we're going to install 2 of these set screws in the balls and these rod ends. And then 2 of these are going to go into this black collar here that goes on the sway bar itself. And it's easier to do this when they're not on the car rotating around. So definitely do this. Okay, so the sway bar inserts are going to install like so. And this is the inside portion of the sway bar insert, because it has this little cutout for the diff insert itself. So take note of that. And the bearing is going to fit into there. Go ahead and put your bearings in. And then it's a 2.5 millimeter sway bar. We're going to install it like this, so the 2.5 is easily read. And use the cutout in the collar on the inside of the turns so you can make it where it needs to go. Okay, now we can install this assembly onto the chassis. We're going to need 2 M4 by 20 flat head screws, which are going to be these. And since they are going into aluminum, we're going to put some blue Loctite on there. So this is just going to install installed like so. I'm just going to tighten down the collars just slightly, just so this doesn't move around or fall apart when I flip the car over, to tighten down the mount onto the chassis. So we're going to flip. And the two holes that we're going to install the screws in are here and here. I'm just going to loosen everything just a little bit. Make sure we have enough wiggle room to install those screws, and then I'll come back and tighten everything down. Yes, I think the threads on this one piece might be messed up. It starts, but it doesn't go all the way. So the tap that probably made this, I mean, you can kind of tell looking down in the hole itself that it's not very clean. All right, so it's 2 days after I started recording this video. I had issues with the sway bar mount. The screws, or at least on one of them, the screws would not go in. And it's going to be kind of difficult to show on camera, but basically what happens is that they anodize this part, and they usually mask off the threads. And I think what happened is they used some type of paint mask or something, and that masking didn't quite dissolve post-process. So when I tried to put the screw in, the screw wouldn't go in all the way. So what I ended up doing was I ended up buying some M4 taps off of Amazon. It cost me about 10 bucks. Considering I do so many builds, I thought might as well just have this handy. And all I did was I put some oil on here. Could have used like some tapping oil, but I just used the oil I use for my bearings just to provide it some lubrication. And all I did was chase the threads, and everything was fine. After I chased the threads, I took some brake cleaner, cleaned out the threads really well on both of them. I washed it with water, and then I let it dry. So it's now good to go. Threads are nice and clean, so we can go ahead and continue on with the build. So now we can go ahead and install the mounts onto the chassis with our two M4x20 screws. We're going to use some blue Loctite. I made sure to wash the screws as well to make sure there's no debris on there. So that way the Loctite has some clean surface to stick onto. All right, so the sway bar mount is installed. Now we can go ahead and install our set screws on these collars and flange bearings. So make sure your bearings are sitting where they're supposed to. And go ahead and tighten down on your N3x3 set screw. You just have to kind of work it a little bit to make sure that your sway bar is somewhat centered. All right, looks like my sway bar is pretty much centered. So we can go ahead and install our end links. It doesn't say where to put the end link on the sway bar, so I'm just gonna mount it flush, and that'll probably give me a good point to start at. and then when I do my setup and tweak, I can check to make sure that it's the same on both sides. So that concludes step 20. We can move on to step 21, which is to install the front shock tower. So we're gonna need the shock tower, and we're gonna need 2 M3 by 12 screws and 2 M3 by 18 screws. And it doesn't say to in the manual, but we're gonna apply some blue Loctite to this since it is going into aluminum. I do love how thick these shock towers are. Nice and beefy. So the way this is gonna install, it's gonna install in between these two transmission pieces here, and we're gonna go through these 4 holes when we install it. So just like so. The 2 M3 by 18 screws are gonna install through the sway bar mount, and then the 2 M3 by 12 screws will just mount through the shock tower itself. And you can use our 2mm hex to tighten it all down. All right, everything still moves nice and free. And that concludes bag 5. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Only issue I had was that one sway bar mount, the threads were kind of dirty, and I just cleaned it up with a tap. I just chased the threads, and everything's working perfectly fine now. So thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe if you did. Stay tuned for the next video where I tackle bag 6, a continuation of the front assembly. It's going to be the front steering and hubs and axles. So I'll see y'all then. Thanks.